Are you able to see my screen? Are you guys able to see my screen? Yes, perfect. Guys, today onwards, we are going to start with our microservices concept. So I'm calling this as Java microservices. In order to attend this Java microservices, the prerequisite is Spring Boot. We are going to learn the microservices development by using Spring Boot. So if you have the knowledge on the Spring Boot, then only you are eligible to attend this class Java microservices. Now, as part of this microservices, what we are going to learn? Course content. This course content divided into 3 parts, guys. So now the first module, we are going to learn RESTful services. We need to understand how to develop RESTful services. Then we will discuss module 2, microservices. And module 3, we are going to learn Spring security. So as part of this microservices classes, we are going to learn mainly 3 things. First one is, what is REST API? How to develop RESTful services by using Spring Boot, and how to develop microservices by using Spring Boot, and how to implement security for our application by using this Spring security. And next one, module 3, we are going to learn about integrations. Spring Boot integration. How to integrate Spring Boot with Apache Kafka, how to integrate Spring Boot with Redis Cache, how to integrate Spring Boot with the Angular. That integration part we are going to learn as part of the last module. RESTful services, microservices, Spring security, and integrations we are going to learn. Now, let us try to understand first what is a RESTful service and why we need to learn RESTful service. Now, fine guys. So earlier, people used to develop the projects as a monolith architecture. Earlier in the companies, people used to develop the project by using one architecture that is called monolith architecture. What is the meaning of a monolith architecture? So now single application will be available for all the functionalities. Single app with all functionalities. If we develop one project with all the functionalities, then that application is called as monolith architecture. For example, in my project, I'm having several functionalities like hotels booking is available, flights booking is available, trains booking is available, then cabs booking is available. 4 different types of functionalities available in my project, but I'm developing one single application with all the functionalities. If you develop a single project with all the functionalities, then that project is called as monolith architecture based application. That monolith architecture based application will communicate with the database. UI will be available, backend will be available, database communication will be available, everything will be available in one application. Such kind of applications are called as monolith architecture based applications. Nowadays in the company, people are not following the monolith architecture. Why people are not following monolith architecture? There are several drawbacks available. When we go for monolith architecture. What are the drawbacks? Here? The first drawback is maintenance. Now, if there is a small change in the project, then I need to modify the project code. I need to repackage the complete code, and I need to redeploy the complete application. Maintenance of the project will become very, very difficult. And single point of failure. What is the meaning of single point of failure? Now, if some functionality is not working, then the whole project is going to be down. If there is a bug in the trains booking, then the whole project is going to be down. Users cannot access our application. Single point of failure will be available, and redeploy entire application. Redeploy entire application. For example, I want to make some code changes in the cabs booking. If I want to make some code changes in the cabs booking, so I make some code changes. Then the complete project should be compiled. The complete project should be packaged. The complete project should be deployed in the server. So that's why redeploying is required for the entire application. Single point of failure is available, and maintenance of the project will become very difficult when you go for monolith architecture. Monolith architecture is old architecture to develop the projects. Earlier, when the companies are developing the projects, they are going to develop one project with all the functionality. If you develop one project with all the functionality, then that application is called as monolithic architecture. Some people will call it as monolith architecture. Some people will call it as monolithic architecture. Both are same. Monolith nothing but single application with several functionalities. Now, what are the problems available when you go for monolith architecture? Maintenance of the project will become difficult. Single point of failure is available. Redeploying the entire application is required. To overcome this monolithic architecture problems, guys, companies are preferring one architecture called microservices architecture. Companies are preferring microservices architecture. This microservices architecture not only for Java. First of all, microservices is not a technology. It is not a framework. It is not a API. Microservices is one design pattern. Microservices is one design pattern. Earlier, people used to develop the project by using monolithic architecture. They identified some challenges with the monolithic architecture. To overcome the challenges of the monolithic architecture, companies are going for microservices architecture. What will happen when you go for microservices? So divide the functionalities into multiple APIs. Don't develop everything in the single project. Don't develop everything in the single project. Develop several APIs. Develop several APIs in the project. Develop several APIs in the project. Earlier, people used to develop only one project with all the functionalities, but in the microservices, develop several APIs in the project. Now, for example, to develop hotels functionality, so here they will come up with one project called Hotels API. Hotels API will contain the logic related to hotels booking. Now, similarly, Flights API will be available. Flights API will contain the logic to book only flights related, and similarly cabs booking will be available and trains booking will be available. Trains API will be available like this. Whatever the functionality you want to develop, don't develop your functionality in the single application. Develop your functionality as a multiple projects, and for this project UI will be available separate. For this project, UI will be available as a separate project. Whenever request comes from the UI, if a user want to access flights booking, then UI will talk to flights booking, UI will talk to hotels booking, UI will talk to trains booking. Are you clear? Earlier what happened? Everything is available in the single application. UI, backend, everything available in the single project. If you develop single project with all the functionalities, then that is called monolith architecture. To overcome the problems of the monolith architecture, we are going for microservices architecture. So in the microservices architecture, for every functionality, one separate project will be created. We are not going to develop everything in the single project. Project functionality will be divided into multiple APIs. Now, hotels booking logic will be available in the hotels API. Hotels API will run in the separate server. Flights API will be available with the flights booking logic that will run in the separate server. Trains booking will be available, that will run in the separate server. So now here, for every functionality, separate API will be created. All these APIs will be accessed from UI application. UI application will be separate, our backend applications will be separate. Now here, hotels API is one project that will run in one server. Flights API is one project, it will run in one server. Trains API, one project, will run in one server. Depends on the requirement. All these APIs may communicate with the single database, or these APIs may communicate with the different databases also. That's again depends on the requirement. Hotels DB will be separate, flights DB will be separate, trains DB will be separate. So these projects are going to communicate with different databases, depends on the requirement. So now observe the diagram, monolith architecture diagram and microservices architecture diagram. What is the difference? What is the difference? In the monolith architecture, everything is available in one project. When it comes to microservices architecture, now here hotels available in one project, hotels booking available in one project, flights booking available in one project, trains booking available in one project. These are called backend APIs. These are called backend APIs. Who will access the backend APIs? UI. End user will communicate with the UI. When end user send a request for trains booking from the UI, request will go to trains project. If a user want to book the flight from the UI, the request will go to flights booking application. If a user wants to book the hotel from the UI, request will go to hotels booking application. Now, when you go like this, what are the advantages we are getting? When we go like this, what are the advantages we are getting? The first advantage is easy maintenance. How can I say easy maintenance? Tomorrow, I want to make some code changes in the hotels project. If I make code changes in the hotels project, will it affect on the remaining projects? Will not affect on the remaining projects? Will not affect on the remaining project. Every project is independent here. Hotels project is separate. Flights project is separate. Trains project is separate. Easy maintenance will be available. Now, here we can say high availability will be available for the application. If trains API is not working, still users can book the flights and hotels. If one project is having a problem, only that functionality will be down. The remaining projects will up and running. So trains is having some issue. Now users can still access the hotels and flights. Only trains functionality will not work. High availability will be available. Fast development. Do I need to wait to develop all the APIs, or I can develop one API and I can test that API? We can develop only flights booking project. I can test that project. I can deliver that project. Faster development will be available. Quick releases will be available. Faster development is available and quick releases available. What is the meaning of quick release? Immediately. Suppose now hotels booking project is developed. I will test that hotels booking functionality. I will deploy that project into the production and people can access that. You no need to wait till complete project development is completed. Whatever the API development is completed, that API you can test it, that API you can deliver. Fast development will be available and quick releases will be available in the microservices. And one more advantage with the microservices, technology independency. Technology independency will be available. Do I need to develop all the APIs by using only Java? Do I need to develop all the APIs by using only Java? All backend APIs are RESTful services. Now, based on my requirement, I am having Java team. Hotels project I will develop by using Java technology. And flights API I will develop by using .NET technology. Trains API I can develop by using Python. So like this here, you can use multiple technologies to develop multiple APIs. I am having only 10 Java developers. If 10 Java developers wants to develop entire project, it will take 1 year. But in my company, Java developers available, Python developers available, .NET developers available. I will take all the 3 team members. I will give one API per one team. Java people will develop a hotels API. .NET people will develop a flights API. Python people will develop a trains API. So I'm able to develop my project by using multiple technologies. Now, backend APIs can be developed with the multiple technologies. So can I do that in the monolith architecture? If I start the project with Java, everything should be developed only using Java. Other language I cannot use in the Java project. But here in the microservices, everything is a separate project. Everything is a separate project. Now, hotels API is one project. I will develop that by using Java. I will deploy that in the server. UI application can send a request to Java application. UI application can send a request to .NET application. UI application can send a request to Python application. Every application is independent. So here, maintenance of the project will become easy. If there is a problem in the trains API, whole project will not be down. Hotels will be running, flights will be running, high availability will be available. I no need to wait till all the projects are completed. I can complete one API, I can test it, I can deliver that. Fast development will be available. Then I need to go for deployment. Quick releases will be available when you go for microservices. And what is the meaning of technology independence? So now in my project, assume that I need to develop 100 APIs. My project is having 100 requirements. 100 requirements I'm developing in 100 APIs. So to develop these 100 APIs, do I need to use only Java? Do I need to use only Java? If you want, you can do like that, or else you can go with the different technologies also. So you can develop your project by using multiple technologies. So that is called technology independency available when you go for microservices. Now tell me, what is a monolith architecture? What is a microservices architecture? What is a monolith architecture, guys? Developing single application with all the functionalities is called as monolith. User interface will be available. Backend functionality will be available. Database communication will be available. Everything we are developing as one project, that is called as monolith architecture. What are the drawbacks of going for monolith architecture? Easy maintenance will become difficult here. Single point of failure, redeploying the entire application. What is the meaning? Maintenance is difficult. If I make a small change, that will affect in some other functionality because single project is available. Single point of failure. If there is a bug in the hotel's booking, the whole project is going to be down and we need to redeploy entire application. What is the meaning of redeploying the entire application? If you make a small change, the whole project should be compiled, whole project should be packaged, whole project should be redeployed. So to overcome the problems of this monolith architecture, people are going for microservices architecture. What is the meaning of microservices? Micro means small. Micro means small. Whatever the requirements you have, don't develop all the requirements in one project. You divide the requirements into small projects. You divide the requirements into small projects. Those small projects are called as our REST APIs. Those small projects are called as our REST APIs. So we need to develop REST API. Every REST API is called as one microservice. REST API we can develop by using Java. We can develop by using .NET. We can develop by using Python also. When you go for microservices, there is no guarantee all the APIs will be developed using one technology. In the real time also, some APIs they will develop by using Java, some APIs with the other technology. Every API is a separate project. Every API is a separate project. It will run in the separate server. Now, in the backend, 3 REST APIs will be developed. 3 REST APIs will run in the 3 servers. UI application will be available. UI will run in the separate server. From the UI, request will go to backend. UI will send the data to backend. Backend will send the data to the UI. That is a REST communication. REST communication is going to happen. What are the advantages if I go for microservices architecture? Easy maintenance. What is the meaning of easy maintenance? What is the meaning of easy maintenance, guys? Come on. What is the meaning of easy maintenance? If there is a problem in one API, I can change only that particular API code. I can compile only that API and I can deploy only that API. Suppose now hotels booking is not working. Can I say my whole project is down? No. High availability will be available. Remaining functionalities will work. And do I need to deliver entire project in single shot? First, I will complete one API. I will test it. I will deliver that. Fast development will be there and quick releases will be available when you go for this microservices. What is the meaning of technology independence? Do I need to use one technology to develop all these things, or can I use multiple technologies? I can use multiple technologies to develop this. Now here, guys, microservices is an architectural design pattern. Microservices is not a programming language. Microservices is not a API. Microservices is not a framework, guys. Then what is microservices? Microservices is an architectural design pattern. We can develop any project by using microservices design pattern. So we can develop any kind of project using microservices. Microservices project nothing but collection of REST APIs. Microservice means one REST API. Microservice is equal to one REST API. Microservice means one REST API. Can .NET people develop their project by using microservices? Yes or no? .NET people will have microservices or will not have the microservices? They will have the microservices. Python people can develop the project using microservices? Yes. What is the meaning of microservices development? Developing the REST APIs. Developing the REST APIs. Are you guys clear? If you go for microservices development, these are the advantages we are going to get. Project maintenance will be easy. Project high availability will be available. Development will be faster. Deployment will be faster. And we can develop the project using multiple technologies. Microservices is an architectural design pattern. We can develop any kind of project using microservices. Microservice nothing but one REST API. When you go for microservices project, collection of backend APIs will be available and front-end application will be available. Now, we need to separate backend project and front-end project. Earlier, we developed WebMVC application. What we have done in the WebMVC application? Backend logic, front-end logic available in the single project. From now onwards, we should not combine backend and front-end. Front-end will be developed as a separate project. Backend will be developed as a separate project. Front-end application should communicate with the backend application. In the backend, one application will be available or multiple APIs will be available. In the backend, multiple APIs will be available. What is the meaning of API? One API nothing but one microservice. One microservice nothing but one REST API. So in order to develop microservices, first what we have to learn? In order to develop microservices, first what we have to learn? First we have to learn how to develop REST API. In order to develop microservices, first we need to learn how to develop REST API. If you know the REST API development, by using REST APIs, we can develop our microservices. After that, we need to develop security. How to secure our application by using Spring Security. Then how to integrate front-end and back-end. And in the back-end, how to integrate with the Kafka, how to integrate with the Redis. Those concepts we have to understand. So as part of this course, we are going to learn 4 modules. First module, RESTful Services Development. Second module, Microservices Architecture. Third module, Spring Security. Fourth module, integrations we have to understand. Are you guys clear, online people? What is microservices and what we are going to learn as part of microservices? So microservices is not a programming language. Microservices is not a framework. Microservice is a design pattern. That is a architectural design pattern. It is used to develop our application with a loosely coupling. So microservices is used to develop application functionality with the loosely coupling. Using microservices architecture, we can develop our application with a loosely coupling. So one functionality will be loosely coupled with the another functionality. If there is a problem in the trains API, it will not affect on the flights and hotels. If there is a code change in the hotels API, do I need to redeploy all the APIs? So if there is a code change in the hotels API, I will modify only that project code. I will compile only that project. I will redeploy only that project. I no need to touch the remaining APIs available in the project. Are you guys clear? Fine. Now here, first we need to understand how to develop RESTful services. Now let us see here, RESTful services. So RESTful services are used to develop distributed applications. What is the main purpose of going for RESTful services? RESTful services are used to develop distributed applications. One application will communicate with the another application, then that is called as a distributed application. What is the main purpose of distributed application? One project will communicate with the another project. So if one project is communicating with the another project, that project is called as a distributed application. In the real time, 2 scenarios will be available to develop a distributed application. One scenario, one project want to communicate with the another project. Now, application 1 is available and application 2 is available. These 2 applications wants to communicate with each other. Let me take this application as passport application. We are having one project called passport application. When you are applying for the passport, will it ask your Aadhaar number or not? It will ask Aadhaar number. How passport will verify your Aadhaar number is valid or not? Aadhaar number will be available in the another application called Aadhaar application. Okay, Aadhaar application developed by one company, passport application developed by another company. Aadhaar application will have its own database, guys. Aadhaar application will have its own database. All the Indians' Aadhaar numbers will be available in the Aadhaar database. Now, Aadhaar application can communicate with the Aadhaar database. So that is already done. You applied for the Aadhaar card. You got the Aadhaar card. You have your Aadhaar number. Your Aadhaar number available in the Aadhaar project database. Okay, that is fine. Now, when you are joining in the company, mainly in the MNC company, they will ask your passport number. Now, you don't have a passport. You need to apply for the passport. You will go to passport application and you will apply for the passport. When you are applying for the passport, this application will ask, enter your Aadhaar number. Now, when you enter the Aadhaar number, do you think that this passport application will connect with Aadhaar database to verify your number is correct or not? Can they communicate like that? No. Why? That is developed by 2 different companies. These are managing by 2 different companies, right? So passport application cannot access Aadhaar database, right? Now here, passport application should verify your Aadhaar number is valid or not. You will enter the Aadhaar number in the passport application, then passport application will communicate with the Aadhaar application. Passport application will send a request to Aadhaar application with your Aadhaar number. Then Aadhaar application will verify your Aadhaar number is correct or not. It will give response to passport application. So here, one project is communicating with the another project. that communication will happen through RESTful services. So now these applications are called as distributed application. One project functionality wants to communicate with the another project functionality. If one project wants to communicate with the another project, we need to develop REST APIs. We need to develop REST API. This is one scenario why we need to learn the REST API. And another scenario, you are using Google Pay, Phone Pay. So from the Google Pay, amount is going to your bank account. How from the Google Pay amount is going to the bank account? Google Pay application communicating with the bank application. So now, if I send amount from my number to your number, from my bank account, amount will go to your bank account by using Google Pay. Google Pay application is communicating with the banking application. Do you think that Google Pay will connect with the SBI database? SBI database will be available for Google Pay or will not be available for Google Pay? No. Google Pay will send the request to SBI application. SBI application will perform the operation, will give the response to Google Pay. Google Pay application communicating with the bank application, that is through REST API only. Clear? Now this is scenario 1. Why we need to go for RESTful services? Are you clear with the scenario 1? Yes. What is the scenario 1? One project want to use the functionality of the another project. One project should communicate with the another project. If one project wants to communicate with the other project, we need to have RESTful services. Those are called as distributed applications. Now, let me go for second scenario. What is the second scenario to go for this RESTful services? Second scenario is microservices development. UI will be available in one project, backend will be available in the another project. UI will be available in one project and backend will be available in the another project. Scenario 2. Now here, let me take, I'm having Hotels API. That is one application in the backend. Hotels API is one application in the backend, and Trains API is one application in the backend. Flights API is one application in the backend. 3 different projects are available. 3 different APIs are available. Hotels API is available, and Trains API is available, and Flights API is available. For all these APIs, UI will be available in the separate project. Here, UI application is available. Now, can I say these are also distributed application? Yes. So, user will talk to UI application. UI application should talk to hotels application. UI application should talk to trains application. UI should talk to flights application. Hotels application will have its own database. Hotels application will have its own database. Trains will have its own database. Flights will have its own database. Now, in the backend, only business logic will be available. Front-end logic will be available in the separate project. UI application should talk to backend application. If UI application want to talk to backend application should be REST API. UI application want to talk to backend application. If UI application want to talk to the backend application should be a REST API. End user will communicate with the UI. UI will communicate with the backend. Backend will communicate with the database. Like this, we are going to develop our projects. So when we are developing our projects, REST API's development is very, very, very important. How to develop the REST API, that is the most important. In 2 scenarios, people will use the REST API. Can I use the REST API in the monolith project also? Yes. So I have a monolith application. My monolith application want to communicate with the other application. I'm having one monolith project. Hospital project is available. My hospital project want to communicate with the other project. One project should communicate with the another project. If one project should communicate with the another project, then we need to go for RESTful services. Another scenario, my project is available on microservices architecture. I want to develop a project with microservices. Developing the microservices nothing but developing the collection of REST API. Hotels API is one REST application. Trains API, one REST application. Flights API, one REST application. Three applications will be deployed into three different servers. UI application will be separate. From the UI, request will go to backend application. So now tell me, what is the purpose of REST APIs? What is the purpose of REST API? To develop distributed application. What is the meaning of distributed application? One project should communicate with the another project, then that is called as distributed application. If one project wants to communicate with the another project, then that is called as distributed application. Are you guys clear with my point? So now in our course, what we are going to learn first? RESTful services. What is the purpose of RESTful services? RESTful services are used to develop distributed application. Collection of REST APIs in a project is called as microservices architecture. Now let's understand what we are going to learn in the RESTful services. It's very, very important to develop REST APIs. Without REST APIs, can you develop microservices? No. In the REST API, first we need to understand what is distributed application. What is distributed application? Can you tell me what is a distributed application? Come on. The application which is communicating with the another application is called as distributed application. If one project is communicating with the another project, then that is called as a distributed application. Now, what are the technologies are available to develop a distributed application? Distributed technologies. What are the distributed technologies are available to develop the application? Currently in the market, RESTful services are trending to develop distributed technology. But before the RESTful services, there are several other technologies available, Corba, EJB, SOAP web services to develop the distributed application. They got outdated in the market and currently people are going for RESTful services. So RESTful services are used to develop our distributed application. After completion of the distributed technologies, we need to understand REST architecture. We need to understand REST architecture. What is the architecture we need to follow to develop our REST API? In the REST architecture, guys, mainly two components will be available. One application is called as provider application. Another application is called as consumer application. One application is called as a provider. Another application is called as a consumer. What is the meaning of a provider? The application which is providing services to other application is called as a provider. Now, here MakeMyTrip is available, IRCTC available. MakeMyTrip will communicate with the IRCTC for the ticket booking. IRCTC providing services to the MakeMyTrip, MakeMyTrip accessing the services. So now here, when you go for REST architecture, we need to talk about two things here. First one is provider and the second one is consumer. What is the meaning of a provider? What is the meaning of a provider, guys? The application which is providing the services to other applications is called as a provider. The application which is consuming the services from the other application is called as a consumer. Are you clear? Now, MakeMyTrip available, IRCTC available. Who is the owner of the train's ticket booking? IRCTC. Can I book the same thing from MakeMyTrip also? What is the meaning of that? MakeMyTrip is communicating with the IRCTC. MakeMyTrip taking the services from the IRCTC. IRCTC providing the services. The application which is providing the services is called as provider. The application which is accessing the services is called consumer. Clear? We need to understand the REST architecture. Once this is completed, the most important part, that is HTTP protocol. REST APIs are going to communicate with the HTTP. What is HTTP? What is HTTP request, HTTP response, HTTP methods, HTTP status codes? We need to have more clarity on HTTP protocol, HTTP methods, HTTP protocol, HTTP request, HTTP response, HTTP request, HTTP response, HTTP methods, get method, post, put, delete methods. Then HTTP status codes also very important. So you need to learn more about HTTP protocol in order to develop the REST API. What is HTTP request? What is the response? What methods available? When to use which method? What status codes available? We need to understand. Are you guys clear? Then after here, consumer and provider will communicate. Consumer and provider will be developed by using same technology, may not be developed using same technology, may or may not. Both can be Java application, but both are not Java applications also. One application is Java, another application is .NET. Then how to communicate? So here, if the technologies are different, then how they are going to communicate with each other? That's where we are going to use XML and we are going to use JSON. We need to understand how to work with the XML data in the Java. To work with XML data in the Java, we need to know one API called JAXB API. After that JAXB completed, we need to work with JSON data. To work with the JSON data, we need to know one API called JSON and JSON API, right? So how to convert Java object to XML? How to convert Java object to JSON? XML to Java, Java to XML, JSON to Java, Java to JSON. How to convert that data? How to represent the data in the form of XML and JSON? We need to understand. For that, we will go for JAXB API and JSON or JSON API. So with this, we are good with the basics of the distributed application. If you know these concepts, that means you will understand what is a distributed application, why we need to go for a distributed application, how distributed applications are working in the market. Now you will get the clarity how Google Pay is communicating with the SBI Bank and how Make My Trip is communicating with the IRCTC, how one bank application communicating with the another bank application. Theoretically, you will understand. What is the distributed application? Why we need to go for distributed application? How distributed applications are running in the market? Okay, with this knowledge, now we need to start our development. So here, the first step is we need to understand provider development. How to develop the provider? What is the meaning of a provider? The application which is providing the services to other application is called as provider. Provider development we need to understand. After provider development completed, provider testing using Postman. How to test our provider? By using a tool called Postman. Once that is completed, now we need to know provider documentation using Swagger. For every provider, documentation is required because whatever the project I am developing, that will be accessed by another company. Another company should know what is my project, how to communicate with my project. For that, for every provider, documentation is required. To provide the documentation for the REST API, we are going to use a concept called Swagger. Now, once this documentation is ready, then we need to go for consumer development. We need to go for consumer development. So consumer development will be available with two flavors. One is sync consumer, another one is async consumer. What is the synchronous, asynchronous development we will understand, and we will develop our consumer. Once the consumer development completed, then we will go for exception handling. How to handle exceptions in the REST API. So we have seen exception handling in the web application, how to handle exceptions in the REST API, that we need to understand here. So if you know these concepts, then you are eligible to develop microservices. In order to develop the microservices, first we need to have the knowledge on these concepts, guys. What is the distributed application? What are the distributed technologies available? What is the REST architecture? What is the provider? What is the consumer? What is the role of HTTP protocol in the distributed application? And how to use XML data? Why to use XML data? How to use JSON data? Why to use JSON data? What is the difference between XML and JSON? Which one is recommended? Then we will go for provider development. How to develop a REST API by using a REST controller. So provider nothing but REST controller, which will take the request, which will give the response. Here in this RESTful services, no UI will be available. Everything is B2B communication. One project will send the request to another project. That project will process the request, will send the response to this project. No UI, no JSP, no time leap. Everything is with the XML and JSON only. Once the provider development completed, how to test that provider? To test that provider, we will use one tool called Postman. Then we need to give the documentation of the provider. To give the documentation of the provider, we are going for Swagger. Once the provider development completed, then I need to go for consumer development. Consumer can be developed by using synchronous communication as well as asynchronous communication. In this here, we are having two classes. One is called REST template, another one is called web client. REST template is available and web client is available to develop our consumer. So once provider and consumer development is ready, then we can test them. And we need to implement exception handling in the REST API. So these things we are going to learn as part of our RESTful services. Once the RESTful services are completed, then we are eligible for microservices development. What is the meaning of microservices development? Developing the REST APIs only. First we will complete the REST API development, then only we will go for microservices development. In the microservices, we need to understand what is a monolith architecture. Already we discussed. What is a monolith architecture? Developing everything in one project is called as monolith architecture. What are the pros and cons of monolith architecture? That means what are the advantages with the monolith and what are the disadvantages of the monolith architecture? Then we will go for microservices architecture. We go for microservices architecture. So microservices introduction basically. Microservices introduction. Once it is done, we are going to discuss pros and cons of microservices. What is the meaning of pros and cons? Advantages and disadvantages. Pros and cons of monolith architecture we need to understand. Pros and cons of microservices we need to understand. Then finally we are going to learn microservices architecture. What is microservice architecture? How to develop microservices in the real time. Once this architecture is completed, then we need to learn one concept called service registry in the microservices. That's where we are going to learn about Eureka server. Eureka server will be available as a service registry. After that, we need to learn about admin server and we need to learn about Jipkin server. Admin server and Jipkin server we are going to learn. Microservices architecture, service registry, admin server, Jipkin server and microservices development, REST APIs. I'm going to develop microservices here, REST APIs. Once the microservice development completed, then we need to understand what is inter-service communication. How one API will communicate with the another API. For the inter-service communication, we are going to use PN client. One API should communicate with the another API. For that, we are going to use a concept called PN client. That communication is called as inter-service communication. Once inter-service communication completed, then we will go for API gateway. In the API gateway, filters will be available and routers will be available. Filters plus routers we need to understand by using API gateway. This API gateway, we are using Spring Cloud Gateway. Earlier, Joule proxy available. Now it is deprecated. In the latest version of the Spring Boot, we need to go for Spring Cloud Gateway. API gateway will be there. That is filters plus routers will be available. So now these things we are going to learn, and along with this, we need to understand load balancing in the microservices by using a concept called ribbon. Ribbon concept will be available. By using ribbon concept, we are going to implement load balancing. After this, we need to understand circuit breaker. There is a design pattern called circuit breaker design pattern, and we need to understand config server. Circuit breaker and config server we need to discuss, and we need to learn how to connect with multiple databases. How my one REST API, one microservice can connect with the multiple databases, connecting with multiple DBs. How one application can connect with multiple databases, that is also important. Now, what is a monolith architecture? Pros and cons of monolith architecture, microservices introduction, pros and cons of microservices, microservices architecture, service registry, admin server, Jenkins server, microservices development, inter-service communication, API gateway, load balancing, circuit breaker, config server, and connecting with multiple databases. These things will be available. Then coming to Spring Security, how to implement security in our application. Three types of securities we are going to learn. First one is basic authentication. Second one is OAuth. Third one is JWT. First one, basic auth. Second one is OAuth 2.0 security. And the third one is JWT security. The three types of securities we need to understand. In the real time, all these three techniques will be used to secure our application. Once Spring Security completed, then we will go for integrations. Integrations means how Spring Boot will be integrated with Apache Kafka, boot with Kafka, boot with Redis, boot with Angular integration. Now here we need to learn Spring Boot plus Kafka integration. Spring Boot plus Kafka integration. Then we will learn Spring Boot plus Redis integration. And we are going to learn Spring Boot plus Angular integration. Full stack. Front end will be available in the Angular. Back end will be available in the Spring Boot. I will show you how to integrate our Angular and Spring Boot. As part of integrations, we are going to learn these three topics. And here from the security, we are going to learn three topics. From the microservices, we are going to learn these concepts. And in order to develop these microservices, the first thing is we need to understand RESTful services. So these are the things that we are going to learn. In order to attend these classes, what is the prerequisite? What is Spring Boot? How to create boot application? How boot web applications will execute? What is embedded server? That is a prerequisite. So if you know the Spring Boot, then you can attend this microservices concept. Java microservices. What is the meaning of Java microservices? How to develop Java application with the microservices architecture. If you go for a .NET, they will call .NET microservices. What will be there in the .NET microservices? They will develop a .NET application with the microservices architecture. Microservices not specific to only Java. Microservices can be used by any technology. Even Python people also can develop the project by using microservices. Java people can develop the project by using microservices. .NET people also can develop the project by using microservices. What is the meaning of microservices? Collection of REST APIs. Developing collection of REST APIs is called as microservices architecture. Before microservices, what was there? Before microservices in the market, monolith architecture was available. What is the meaning of monolithic architecture? What is the meaning of monolithic architecture? Monolith architecture means developing all the functionalities in the single application. Developing all the functionalities in the single application is called as monolithic architecture. To overcome the problems of the monolith architecture, we are going for microservices architecture. What is the meaning of microservices architecture? Dividing the functionalities into multiple REST APIs. Don't develop everything in one project. Divide the functionalities into multiple APIs so that several advantages are available. In order to develop the microservices, first we need to know RESTful services. What is the purpose of RESTful services? What is the purpose of RESTful services? Communication. One project will be communicating with the another project. To establish the communication between two applications, we are going to use RESTful services. Now tomorrow, when you go for the company, the project development will be based on these 4 modules only. Even fresher or 5 years or 10 years or 15 years Java experienced developer will work with these 4 concepts in the industry. Now in my company, my work will be there on these 4 concepts only. We need to develop RESTful services by using microservices architecture. We need to implement security for the microservices. We need to implement integrations in the microservices. And front end will be developed by using Angular. And back end front end integration we have to do. This is the real Spring Boot microservices. So if you know these 4 areas, then only you can crack any interview. In the interview, definitely they are going to ask the questions from these 4 areas. What is REST API? How many REST APIs available in the project? How to secure the REST API? How one application can communicate with another application? How you will integrate front-end application with the back-end application? How you are using Kafka in your project? How Spring Boot will communicate with the Kafka? How Spring Boot will communicate with the Redis server? Every day, our work will be there on 4 concepts only. Are you guys, do you think that anybody using Spring Boot for UI development? No, just for syllabus, just for knowledge we learn that. In the market, why people are using Spring Boot? Where people are using Spring Boot? In the market, people are using Spring Boot because of less configuration. Mainly Spring Boot is using to develop microservices. Microservices nothing but collection of REST API. So the most important part, how to develop a REST API by using Spring Boot, how to secure the REST API by using Spring Security, how one REST API can communicate with the another REST API, how one REST API will communicate with multiple databases, how one REST API will communicate with the another REST API, how REST API will communicate with the Kafka, how REST API will communicate with the Redis, how REST API will communicate with the Angular or React. That is the important part. The next 30 to 40 days of time is very important for us because we need to understand microservices development. What is our course? Spring Boot and microservices. We completed Spring Boot. Now we are starting our microservices. Are you clear? Online students, any doubts? Yes, it is going to take 30 to 40 days of time to complete all these concepts, guys. Shiva, yes, you can join that. The people who already completed Spring Boot, WebMVC, only those people should join here. Without having the knowledge on the Spring Boot and WebMVC module, you cannot understand this. Spring Boot plus WebMVC is required for this. Spring Boot plus Spring WebMVC. Prerequisites. Spring Boot plus Spring WebMVC required. Then only you will understand RESTful services and microservices. Okay, good. Online students, anybody having any questions? No questions. Yeah. Offline students, any questions? Okay, good. So if no questions with this, I'm stopping for today. So tomorrow we are going to start with our RESTful services discussion. Thank you. Online students can join the class with the same Zoom link tomorrow. Thank you, guys.